Sometimes the person who is supposed to protect you is the one who throws you to the wolves. Sometimes your deepest shame becomes the key to your salvation. In the forgotten frontier town of Cold Mercy, a place as harsh as its name, Preacher Mercer does the unthinkable. He takes his own daughter, 19 years old and heavy with child, and hands her over to a monster. At least, that's what everyone thought he was. The man's name was Cade Rollins, a giant who lived in the mountains, a recluse feared by the whole town. Everyone watched as the preacher handed his daughter over, certain it was a punishment worse than death. They expected her to suffer. They expected her to break. But Cade Rollins did something nobody, absolutely nobody expected. He didn't hurt her. He didn't shame her. He gave her a home. He showed her kindness. He saw the light in her when everyone else, including her own father, saw only darkness. What happens when the man everyone calls a monster becomes the only one who can save you? What happens when the truth is far more terrifying than the town's darkest whispers? Stay with me, because this story goes to places you will never see coming. The sun was a pale, watery eye in the Montana sky, casting long, skeletal shadows across Cold Mercy's main street. The town had earned its name. It was a place carved from rock and unforgiving wilderness, a place where morality was as rigid and as cold as the winter ice. Inside the general store, Mrs. Abnethy watched Leah Jane Mercer walk by, her lips, thin as razor wire, pressed together in a line of pure judgment. Leah's condition was obvious now, the swell of her belly impossible to hide beneath the loose dress that had once belonged to her mother. "Shameful," Mrs. Abnethy hissed, loud enough for half the store to hear. "Utterly shameful. That poor preacher, having to bear such a cross, his own flesh and blood." Leah kept her chin high. She pretended not to hear, but the words were like stones, pelting her with every step. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a shrinking cage. At 19, she thought she'd learned how to survive in a town built on judgment, but the last few months had worn her down to almost nothing. The weight in her belly was more than just a child. It was the weight of her father's silence, the weight of his disappointment. Cold Mercy was a town of two poles. At one end stood the Methodist Church, its white steeple like an accusing finger pointing to heaven. At the other end, the saloon squatted like a bloated toad, a place the good ladies of the town pretended didn't exist. Between God and sin, the people of Cold Mercy lived their lives, always watching, always whispering. Reputation was the only currency that mattered. It could get you credit at the store. It could get you help fixing a roof. It could save your life when the winter blizzards came howling down from the mountains. A bad name could get you left for dead in a ditch. Leah knew this. She had grown up in the shadow of the pulpit, the daughter of Reverend Isaiah Mercer, a man whose reputation was built on fire and brimstone sermons that could make grown men cry. He was a tall, powerful man, his voice a clap of thunder from the lectern. But that same voice had become a hollow whisper the day Dr. Morrison confirmed Leah's pregnancy. Those same hands that could comfort the grieving had clenched into fists of rage. He demanded to know the father's name. She refused. She refused to name Thomas Whitmore, the charming man who had filled her head with promises of marriage and a family, only to vanish the very night she told him she was carrying his child. He left a note about urgent business in Denver and was gone. That was 7 months ago. Denver might as well have been on the moon. Now, her father's house, once filled with scripture and laughter, was a tomb. He barely spoke to her. Meals were silent, cold affairs. His prayers were muttered, empty words that offered no comfort, only judgment. The shame was his, he'd told her. Shame on his ministry. Shame on her dead mother's memory. The mention of her mother was the deepest cut. Sarah Beth Mercer had been the heart of their home, a woman of gentle smiles and quiet strength. Her worn Bible, filled with her handwritten notes in the margins, now sat on Leah's nightstand. It was the only piece of her mother she had left. "Love is patient," her mother had written beside a verse. "Love is kind. It keeps no record of wrongs." Her father seemed to have forgotten those words. The isolation was crushing. Old friends crossed the street to avoid her. The ladies of the church auxiliary no longer invited her to their quilting circles. She was an outcast, a ghost in her own town. But Leia had her father's backbone, if not his cold heart. She found solace in small things: the morning light on her floor, the kick of life within her womb, a constant reminder that she was not truly alone. Then, one afternoon, she heard the name that would change everything: Cade Rollins. She was coming home from the mercantile when she heard voices from her father's study. It was Mayor Hutchkins. "It's a practical solution, Reverend," the mayor was saying. "The man's used to taking care of strays." "My daughter is not livestock," her father replied, but his voice was weak, lacking its usual fire. "Isaiah, be reasonable. Cade Rollins has a reputation for being fair with his animals, and Lord knows he could use the company on that massive spread of his. It's a solution." Leia froze in the hallway, clutching a bag of flour to her chest. Her blood ran cold. Cade Rollins. The name was a legend in Cold Mercy. A ghost story parents told their children. He owned a massive ranch 15 miles north of town, a sprawling kingdom of cattle and horses that stretched all the way to the timberline. They said he was a war veteran, a man who had seen so much death he now preferred the company of beasts. He came to town once a month, a silent giant who moved with a predator's grace. Men stepped out of his way, women pulled their children close. It wasn't just fear. It was the kind of awe you reserved for a thunderstorm or an avalanche, a force of nature you did not provoke. "He's got that big house all empty," the mayor pressed. "What you're suggesting is barbaric," her father said. Again the hesitation, the sound of a man drowning, grasping for any piece of driftwood. "What I'm suggesting is practical," the mayor insisted. "The girl needs a place to go. You need your reputation back. Cade needs, well, who knows what Cade Rollins needs. But he has the means. It might just work out for everyone." Leia heard enough. She fled to the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly she could barely put the flour down. The voices from the study droned on for another hour, the rise and fall of a negotiation, a deal being struck, a deal for her. When her father finally came out, his eyes told her everything. The decision was made, but he couldn't bring himself to say the words. Not for 3 more days. 3 days of suffocating silence, of watching her father's conscience wrestle with his pride, and seeing his pride win. When he finally told her, it wasn't with a father's love. It was with a preacher's judgment. He was casting her out, and in doing so, he was sentencing her to a fate worse than any she could have imagined. The wind on Thursday morning carried the false promise of spring. It was sharp, cold, and cruel. Leia was hanging laundry, the clean white sheets snapping in the wind like flags of surrender. A dull ache had settled deep in her lower back. "Leia Jane!" Her father's voice. It wasn't his father voice, it was his preacher voice, the one he used to summon sinners to repentance. He stood in the back doorway, a silhouette against the dim light of the house, his shoulders squared like a hangman's. "Come inside. We need to talk." The time for avoidance was over. She knew it. The final judgment was about to be delivered. She stepped into the parlor, and her heart stopped. 2 men were waiting with her father. Mayor Hutchkins, perched nervously on the edge of a chair, his hat turning over and over in his sweaty hands, and him. Standing by the window, a giant of a man, his shadow swallowing half the room, Cade Rollins. He was even larger up close, taller, broader. His shoulders strained the seams of his simple work shirt, dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, a face carved from granite, weathered by sun and wind. But it was his hands that held her gaze. They were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who wrestled life from the earth. Yet he held his hat so gently, as if it were a fragile bird. "Sit down, daughter," her father commanded. His voice was cold, formal, the voice he used for church business. "Mr. Rollins and I have reached an understanding regarding your situation." Leia sank into a chair, her mind reeling. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture of pure horror. "My situation?" she whispered. "Your condition," her father corrected, his voice sharp. has become a source of great difficulty for this household, for my ministry. My responsibility is to my congregation. Your presence here in your current state undermines my ability to lead them. The words weren't just words. They were stones. They were fists, each one aimed to wound, wrapped in the language of righteousness. Father, I have prayed on this. He cut her off, his voice gaining strength, feeding on its own certainty. And I believe the Lord has provided a solution. Mr. Rollins has graciously agreed to take responsibility for you. Silence. The only sound was the frantic ticking of the clock on the mantel, the wind rattling the window pane. Leah stared at her father, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to say it was all a terrible, cruel joke. But his eyes were cold as a winter river. There was no love there, no regret. Only the chilling finality of a business transaction. You can't be serious, she breathed, her hand flying to her belly, a primal, protective gesture. You can't just give me away. I can, he said, the words like nails in a coffin. And I will. Mr. Rollins will provide for your needs until the child is born. After that, arrangements will be made. Arrangements for her child, like it was a parcel to be mailed. Mayor Hutchkins cleared his throat. Now, Leah, this is for the best. Mr. Rollins has a fine ranch, plenty of room. He'll see you're treated proper. Suddenly, the giant by the window spoke. His voice was a low rumble like distant thunder. It seemed to shake the very floorboards. Begging your pardon, Mayor, Cade Rollins said, turning to face her fully for the first time. But I think the lady should hear this from me. And then Leah saw his eyes. They weren't cruel. They weren't cold. They were the color of rich, dark earth after a spring rain, and in their depths, she saw something that stunned her into silence. Kindness. Miss Mercer, he said, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. I want you to know, this arrangement, if you agree to it, you will be treated with respect. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't ask anything of you, except to let me provide for you, until you decide what to do next. The breath caught in her throat. He was giving her a choice. And if I refuse? She asked, her eyes darting to her father. She already knew the answer. Then you are welcome to find shelter where you can, her father said, his voice laced with ice. But not under my roof, and not with my name. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. In that one moment, the image of her father shattered. He wasn't a man of God. He was a coward, a man whose pride was worth more than his own child. Mayor Hutchkins, ever the bureaucrat, pulled a folded document from his coat. There are papers to be signed, of course, to make it all legal, transferring responsibility. Nothing permanent, you understand. Papers. They had papers, a contract to dispose of a human being. Mr. Rollins assumes responsibility for your care, the mayor explained, and in return he will receive certain considerations regarding your welfare and that of the child. Cade Rollins took a step forward, his shadow falling over the mayor. His face had darkened. Hold on, Mayor, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. We never discussed any considerations about the child. That was not our agreement. Well, of course, the mayor stammered, if you're providing for the mother. The only expectation, Cade interrupted, his authority silencing the room, is that I provide a safe place for this young lady to have her baby, in peace, nothing more, nothing less. He looked directly at Leah, and in his eyes, she saw a promise, a silent vow. Miss Mercer, he said, his voice soft again, if you're willing, I promise you safety, comfort, privacy, for as long as you need it. And when the time comes to decide what's next, the choice will be yours, not mine, not your father's, yours. The choice. It was no choice at all. Stay here, in this house of cold judgment, drowning in shame, or go with the stranger, the monster, the giant with the kind eyes. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected place. I'll need to pack my things, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her father nodded, a sharp, quick movement, the movement of a man relieved of a great burden. Mr. Rollins will be back for you in the morning. Be ready. As her father and the mayor left the room, Their business concluded, Leia stared out the window. She saw Cade Rollins talking to her father by the gate. The wind carried fragments of his voice. "Build her a room with windows," Cade was saying. "She'll want to see the sky." It sounded like a promise, but it also sounded like a warning. For the first time in 7 months, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited in Leia's chest, but it was mixed with a cold dread. Who was this man, Cade Rollins? And what did he really want with her? The wagon ride to the ranch was a silent, winding journey into the unknown. They climbed through mountain passes where stubborn snow still clung to the shadows. Cade Rollins sat beside her, his massive frame steady on the wagon seat, his hands sure on the reins. He didn't speak much, but he pointed out landmarks: a creek where elk drank at dawn, a grove of aspens that would turn to gold in the fall, an outcropping of rock where a pair of eagles nested every year. His voice was a low, comforting rumble, a stark contrast to the sharp, judgmental tones she had left behind in Cold Mercy. As they crested a final hill, the valley opened up below them, and Leia gasped. It wasn't a grim, isolated fortress like she'd imagined. It was beautiful. The ranch house, built of dark logs and gray riverstone, sat nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees by a sparkling creek. It was a large, solid house with a wide front porch and windows that seemed to catch the morning sun and welcome it inside. A barn, corrals, a chicken coop, and a workshop were laid out with a sense of order and care. "It's beautiful," she said, the word escaping before she could stop it. Cade glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes, as if he had expected fear, not admiration. "It's good land. Been in my family since before the war." As he helped her down from the wagon, his touch was brief, gentle, and respectful. But as she stood before the house, a strange feeling washed over her. The porch railings weren't simple logs. They were carved with intricate swirling patterns, flowers and vines, so detailed they looked real. It was the work of a master craftsman, someone with endless hours to fill. And the house itself? It was enormous, far too big for one man. "Got the room ready for you," Cade said, leading her inside. "Faces east and south. You'll get good light." The inside was as surprising as the outside. Polished plank floors, comfortable furniture, shelves overflowing with books. It was a home, not a hermit's hovel. It was clean, orderly, and filled with a quiet sense of peace. But the peace felt fragile, like a thin layer of ice over deep, dark water. He led her upstairs to a room that stole her breath. It was large and airy, with 2 big windows looking out over the valley. A colorful quilt was folded on the bed. A mason jar filled with bright yellow wildflowers sat on the dresser, and in the corner of the room, her heart gave a painful lurch. A cradle. It was made of the same dark wood as the house, carved with the same impossible, intricate patterns as the porch railings. The wood was sanded and oiled to a soft gleam. It was lined with soft, clean fabric. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of love and care, but it filled her with a sudden, chilling dread. You made this?" she whispered, unable to look away from it. Cade stood in the doorway, suddenly looking awkward and out of place in his own home. He twisted the brim of his hat in his big, scarred hands. "Figured, you might need it. It's nothing fancy, but it's solid." Nothing fancy? It was the most beautiful piece of furniture she had ever seen. But the question clawed at her throat. Why? Why would this stranger, this man she'd met only yesterday, spend countless hours creating such a perfect thing for a child that wasn't his? Her own father treated her baby as a burden to be discarded. This man, he had prepared for it, welcomed it. A cold thought slithered into her mind. Has he done this before? "It's lovely," she managed to say. "I'll leave you to get settled," he said, backing out of the room. "Supper's around 6, but you eat when you want, sleep when you want. This is your home now, for as long as you need it." He closed the door, leaving her alone in the sun-drenched room. She sank onto the bed, her body trembling. This place was supposed to be a punishment, a place of exile. Instead, it felt like a sanctuary. But sanctuaries could also be prisons. That evening she found him in the kitchen, covered in flour, a look of grim determination on his face as he wrestled with a lump of biscuit dough. She gently took over, and he watched her with a quiet gratitude that was more comforting than any words. They ate in near silence, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of her father's house. It was a comfortable quiet. He asked her simple, practical questions: how she liked her coffee, if certain foods bothered her, small kindnesses that felt overwhelmingly large. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For all of this, for treating me like a person?" He finished for her, his voice low. "You shouldn't have to thank a man for that, Miss Mercer. That's just how things ought to be." Later that night, tucked into the clean, comfortable bed, Leia listened to the sounds of the ranch, the creak of the wood, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of the wind. She could hear Cade moving around downstairs, banking the fire, locking the doors, the sounds of a protector. But as she drifted off to sleep, the image of the cradle burned in her mind. It was a beautiful promise, or a beautiful cage. The days that followed settled into a strange, peaceful rhythm. Leia discovered Cade was a man of routines. He rose before the sun, moving with a cat-like quietness that defied his size. He would leave fresh coffee on the stove and a basket of warm eggs on the counter before heading out to the barn. She took over the cooking, finding a sense of purpose in kneading bread and simmering stews. It was a small way to earn her keep, to feel like something more than a charity case. He never said much, but she would see the look on his face when he came in from a long day of mending fences or wrangling cattle, the simple pleasure of a hot meal waiting for him. One morning, she found him in the vegetable garden, turning over the rich, dark soil. "What are you planting?" she asked from the porch steps. "The usual," he said, not looking up. "Potatoes, beans, things that keep." He paused, leaning on his shovel. "You have thoughts on the matter?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked for her thoughts on anything in a very long time. "My mother, she used to grow herbs," Leia found herself saying. "Sage and thyme. She said they made simple food taste like a celebration." A slow smile touched Cade's lips. "Herbs would be good. Haven't had much cause for them, just cooking for myself." He looked at her belly. "But I reckon that's about to change." The small moments of kindness were relentless. He fixed a loose step on the porch without her asking. He started leaving a small bucket of milk from Duchess, the old milk cow, on the back step for her every morning. He never commented on her growing belly, never made her feel ashamed. He simply made room for her. But the house held its secrets. There was a room at the end of the upstairs hallway. Its door was always closed. One afternoon, driven by a curiosity she couldn't quell, she tried the handle. It was locked. When she casually asked him about it later, his face closed off. "That's just a storage room," he said, his voice flat. "Full of old things. Nothing you'd be interested in." The answer was too quick, too final. He talked about the ranch, the horses, the weather. He would listen for hours if she wanted to talk about the books on his shelves. But he never, ever talked about himself. He never mentioned a wife, or children, or the family he said had owned this land for generations. The war he'd fought in was a closed book. He was a man made of walls, kind walls, gentle walls, but walls nonetheless. And the cradle still sat in the corner of her room, a silent, beautiful mystery. One afternoon, a wagon appeared on the long road leading to the ranch. It was Mayor Hutchkins. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around as if he expected ghosts to leap from the shadows. He'd come, he said, just to check on her, to make sure the arrangement was working out. "He's treating you well, then?" the mayor asked, his voice low when Cade was out of earshot, fetching them water. "He's been very kind," Leia said. The mayor nodded, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, though the day was cool. Good. He's a good man, Cade. A bit solitary, but he has his reasons." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. after what happened last time, with the last family he tried to help. Well, it's good to see this is working out better. Before Leia could ask what he meant, Cade returned. The mayor drank his water quickly, made his excuses, and practically fled back to his wagon. The last family he tried to help. A chill snaked down Leia's spine. The peace of the ranch suddenly felt like a lie. Was Cade's kindness a performance? Was this quiet sanctuary a repeat of some past tragedy? That night, sleep wouldn't come. The mayor's words echoed in her mind. She felt a desperate need for comfort, for a connection to the life she had known before all of this. She reached for her mother's Bible on the nightstand. She opened the worn leather cover, the pages falling open to a familiar passage. Her mother's delicate handwriting filled the margins. Leia ran her fingers over the words, a familiar ache in her heart. As she closed the book, her fingers brushed against something tucked deep inside the back cover. A small, folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. She had never seen it before. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. It was a letter, a note, written in her mother's hand. But it wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to her father. "My dearest Isaiah," the note began, "I pray you never have to read this. But if you do, it means the worst has come to pass. You must remember the promise you made me. The terrible secret we share must remain buried, and you must never forget the debt we owe. The debt that can never be fully repaid. The debt to the Rollins family." The Bible slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the floor. The Rollins family. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Her father hadn't sent her to a stranger. He had sent her to a man from his past, a man to whom he owed an unpayable debt. This wasn't an act of kindness. It wasn't a practical solution. It was a payment. She was the payment. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. Leia clutched the yellowed note in her hand, the words blurring through her tears. The Rollins family. The name echoed in the silent room, a key turning in a lock she never knew existed. Every act of kindness from Cade now seemed sinister. The comfortable room, the carefully prepared meals, the beautiful haunting cradle. Were they gifts, or were they chains, wrapping around her, binding her to a fate decided long before she was born? This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a prison built from old secrets and hidden debts. She had to know. She found him on the front porch, sitting in the darkness, staring out at the mountains. He looked like a statue carved from the night itself. The note felt like a burning coal in her hand. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking but clear. He turned his head slowly. In the faint moonlight, she could see the surprise on his face. "You know who I am, Miss Mercer." "No," she said, taking a step closer. "I know your name, but I don't know who you are. Why am I really here, Cade?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze turning back to the dark peaks. "I gave you my word. I'm here to provide for you, to keep you safe." "Safe from what?" she pressed, her voice rising. "From my father? From the town? Or from you?" She held up the note. "My mother wrote this. She wrote about a debt my father owes your family." She saw his shoulders tense. He didn't look at the note. He didn't have to. "You should go back inside, Leia," he said, his voice a low warning. "It's getting cold." "I'm not a child you can send to bed," she shot back. "I am part of this, whatever it is. You brought me into your home. You built a cradle for my baby. I have a right to know why." He stood up then, and the full force of his size was overwhelming. He wasn't the gentle giant from the kitchen. He was the monster the town whispered about. He took a step toward her, his face a mask of stone in the moonlight. "Some things are better left buried," he said, his voice a low growl. "It's too late for that," she whispered, holding her ground, though her heart was pounding against her ribs like a trapped animal. "Tell me the truth." He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of profound weariness. "The truth?" He gave a short, bitter laugh. "The truth is a complicated thing in a place like Cold Mercy." He finally looked at her, and the kindness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, ancient pain. "My father and yours, they were partners once. a long time ago. They bought this land together. They had a dream. Your father, he had a different dream. The story came out in broken pieces, dragged from a place of deep hurt. Her father, the righteous Reverend Isaiah Mercer, had not always been a man of God. He had been a man of ambition. He and Cade's father had a stake in a silver claim, a claim that turned out to be richer than either of them had ever imagined. But on the day they were to file the claim, Isaiah Mercer went to the land office alone. He registered the entire claim in his name. He took everything. Cade's father was ruined. He lost the land, the money, everything. He died a few years later, a broken man. Cade was just a boy. He went off to war, and when he came back, he used what little money he had to buy back this small piece of the original ranch. The piece Isaiah hadn't wanted. So this is about revenge, Leia breathed, the pieces clicking into a horrible new picture. You're taking from him what he values most, his daughter, his reputation. It started that way, Cade admitted, his voice raw. When the mayor came to me, told me the preacher's daughter was in trouble, that the preacher wanted a practical solution. I saw my chance. A perfect poetic justice. I would take his child, just as he had taken my father's future. Leia felt sick. She backed away from him, her hand on her belly. So this is all a lie. The kindness, the safety, it's a game. No, he said, and his voice was filled with a desperate sincerity. That's what's changed. I brought you here for revenge, but then I met you. He looked at her, his eyes pleading. I saw your strength, I saw your goodness, the way you stood up to your father, the way you hold your head high. You're not like him, Leia. You're like her. Like who? She asked, her voice a whisper. Like my mother, he said softly. She had that same fire, that same gentle heart. He shook his head, as if trying to clear it. This isn't about revenge anymore. I swear to you, I just want to protect you, and the baby. But the ranch no longer felt safe. The foundation of trust she had started to build had crumbled into dust. He had brought her here as a pawn in a game of vengeance. What if his old desires for revenge were stronger than his newfound conscience? Suddenly, a sound cut through the night. The frantic drumming of horses' hooves, coming fast up the road to the ranch. Too fast. Cade's head snapped up, his body instantly alert. He grabbed Leia's arm, his grip like iron, and pulled her behind him. Get in the house, he hissed. Now! A lone rider burst into the moonlit yard, his horse lathered and gasping for air. The man practically fell from the saddle. He was frantic, his eyes wide with terror. Leia recognized him. It was one of the farmhands from a neighboring ranch. Rollins, the man yelled, stumbling towards the porch. You've got to help. It's Whitmore. He's back. The name hit Leia like a physical blow. Thomas Whitmore, the father of her child. He's not alone, the farmhand gasped, clutching a wound on his side. He's got a gang with him. They rode into the McGregor place looking for something. They said the preacher sent them, said the preacher owed them. Cade was already moving, pushing Leia towards the door. What did they take? They didn't take anything, the man choked out. They were looking for a girl, the preacher's daughter. They said the preacher told them she'd be here. Leia's blood ran cold. Her father hadn't sent her here for revenge. He hadn't sent her here for safety. He had set a trap, and she was the bait. The world spun, a kaleidoscope of betrayal, her father's coldness, the mayor's nervousness, Cade's story of revenge. It was all a lie, or a piece of a much larger, more terrifying truth. Inside, Cade commanded, his voice no longer gentle. It was the hard, sharp command of a soldier. He shoved her through the door and slammed it shut, dropping a heavy wooden bar into place. He moved to the windows, pulling the thick shutters closed, plunging the room into darkness. What is happening? Leia cried, her voice trembling. Your father didn't just swindle my family, Leia, Cade said, his voice grim as he checked the rifle he'd taken from above the mantel. He got into business with very bad men. Thomas Whitmore wasn't some charming suitor who got scared. He's part of a gang, and your father stole something from them, something they want back. Leia's mind reeled. Thomas, A criminal? It didn't make sense. My father is a preacher, she protested. Your father, Cade said, his voice laced with grim certainty, is a liar and a thief. He used your shame as an excuse. He knew Whitmore would come back for him. He knew they would use you as leverage. So he sent you away. He sent you to me. Why you? She whispered, sinking into a chair, the weight of it all crushing her. Because he knew I was the only man in this valley who could protect you from them, Cade said, his eyes scanning the dark windows. And he knew I owed him nothing. He thought he was being clever, using his old enemy to solve his new problem. He set you up as bait to draw Whitmore out, thinking I would deal with him. The ranch was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. From outside, a voice called out, slick and familiar, yet twisted with a menace she had never heard before. Leah Jane, I know you're in there. Your father sends his regards. He told me I could find you here. Seems he and I have some unfinished business to discuss. It was Thomas Whitmore, and he did not sound like the man who had promised her a future. He sounded like a wolf circling its prey. Suddenly, another horse thundered into the yard. A new voice, filled with panic and desperation, screamed out, Whitmore, leave them be! The deal is with me! Leah's heart stopped. She knew that voice. She ran to the shuttered window, peering through a small crack. In the moonlight she saw him, her father, Reverend Isaiah Mercer, standing alone in the yard, facing down Thomas Whitmore and a half-dozen armed, shadowy figures. The deal has changed, preacher, Whitmore sneered, dismounting from his horse. He walked slowly towards Isaiah, a cruel smile on his face. You took my family's map. You promised a partnership. Then you ran with everything. I want it back, and I want the girl, as a bonus. The girl has nothing to do with this, Isaiah pleaded, his righteous authority gone, replaced by the raw terror of a cornered man. Take me. Let her go. Oh, I'll be taking you, Whitmore said with a chilling laugh. But first, we're going to pay a visit to your daughter, and your friend, Rollins. He gestured to his men. Burn it down. Torches flared to life in the darkness. The men started moving toward the house. Inside, Cade grabbed Leah, pulling her away from the window. Get to the cellar, he ordered. The door is under the rug in the kitchen. Stay there. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. His face was a mask of cold fury. This was no longer about an old debt or a broken heart. This was about survival. He was the protector he had promised to be, but the danger was far greater than she could have ever imagined. As she scrambled toward the kitchen, the first torch hit the side of the barn. Flames erupted, painting the night sky in horrifying shades of orange and red. The sound of splintering wood and angry shouts filled the air. Her father had delivered her from one hell, only to plunge her headfirst into another. And the monster everyone in Cold Mercy feared was now the only thing standing between her and the real devils who had come to claim her. The cellar was dark and smelled of damp earth and stored apples. Leah huddled in the corner, her body shaking uncontrollably. Above her, the house had become a war zone. The thunder of gunshots, the crash of breaking glass, the roar of the spreading fire. She could hear Cade's rifle crack, a steady, deadly rhythm. Then the answering shots from Whitmore's gang. She pressed her hands over her belly, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Praying for the baby. Praying for the strange, silent man who was now fighting for her life. Hours seemed to pass in the darkness. The sounds of battle would rage, then fall into an eerie quiet, only to erupt again. Through the thick floorboards, she could feel the heat from the burning barn. The air in the cellar grew thick with smoke. In a moment of quiet, she heard her father's voice, raw with agony. Please, stop. I'll tell you where it is. The map. It's not here. Liar! Whitmore's voice snarled back. You wouldn't leave something that valuable behind. There was a sickening thud, followed by a cry of pain from her father. Leah squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face. He was a coward, a hypocrite, a liar, but he was still her father. She needed to do something. She couldn't just hide here while people died for her. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom, and she saw a small, grimy window high up on the cellar wall, level with the ground outside. It offered a sliver of a view of the yard, illuminated by the terrible, dancing firelight. She dragged an old crate beneath it and climbed up, peering out into the nightmare. Whitmore had her father on his knees. 2 of his men were down, still and silent on the ground, but 3 others were advancing on the house, using a heavy log as a battering ram against the front door. Cade's rifle cracked from an upstairs window, and another man fell, but the ram hit the door again. A loud crack echoed through the night. It wouldn't hold much longer. Her father looked up, his face bloody and broken. His eyes, for a moment, seemed to find hers through the tiny cellar window. He saw her. A look of pure, gut-wrenching despair crossed his face. He had failed. His desperate, twisted plan to protect her had brought only death and destruction to her doorstep. Then, his expression changed. It hardened. A flicker of the old fire, the preacher's fire, returned to his eyes. He got to his feet, swaying but resolute. "The map is not in the house, Whitmore," he said, his voice ringing with a strange, new authority. "I buried it, out by the old creek bed, where we first made our camp." Whitmore paused, suspicion warring with greed on his face. "You're lying." "No," Isaiah said. "I'm a sinner, a thief. But I will not see my daughter harmed. I'll take you to it. Just me and you. Call off your men." It was a bluff. Leah knew it. There was no map. Her father was trying to lead Whitmore away, to buy them time, to sacrifice himself. Whitmore hesitated. Then a greedy smile spread across his face. "All right, preacher, you and me. We'll go for a little walk." He grabbed Isaiah by the collar and started dragging him away from the house, toward the darkness beyond the firelight. But as they passed the burning barn, Isaiah did something that made Leah's heart stop. He lunged sideways, grabbing a fallen, burning timber from the collapsed structure. With a roar of fury and repentance, he swung it, not at Whitmore, but at the main support beam of the barn's hayloft, a beam already groaning under the weight of the fire. The beam cracked. The loft, heavy with hay and engulfed in flames, gave way. A massive, fiery wave of hay and timber collapsed downwards, right on top of Whitmore and her father. The world exploded in a shower of sparks and a deafening roar. Then, silence. The 2 remaining gang members, seeing their leader consumed by fire, panicked. They fired a few wild shots at the house, then scrambled for their horses and fled into the night. Leah stayed frozen at the window, staring at the inferno that had been the barn. It was a funeral pyre. Her father was gone. He had spent months shaming her, only to give his life for her in the end. The hypocrisy, the cruelty, the sacrifice. It was too much to comprehend. Slowly, the cellar door creaked open. A beam of lamplight cut through the darkness. Cade stood there, his face black with soot, a fresh cut bleeding on his forehead. He looked down at her, his eyes filled with a weary sorrow. "It's over," he said softly. "They're gone." She climbed down from the crate, her legs numb, and stumbled into his arms. He held her, his big arms wrapping around her, providing a solid, steady anchor in a world that had just been burned to the ground. She wept, for her father, for her lost innocence, for the terrifying, violent world she had just been introduced to. After a long time, he gently led her upstairs. The house was a wreck. The front door was splintered, windows were shattered, and the smell of smoke was everywhere. But it was standing. They were alive. He sat her down at the kitchen table and cleaned the cut on her head with a gentle touch. Neither of them spoke. There were no words for what had just happened. As the first gray light of dawn began to creep over the mountains, a new, sharp pain shot through Leah's back. It was different from the dull ache she'd grown used to. This was sharp, insistent. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Cade looked at her, his eyes wide with a new kind of alarm. "Leah, what is it?" Another wave of pain washed over her, more intense this time. She looked at him, her own fear mirroring his. "Cade," she breathed, I think the baby is coming." Panic flared in Cade's eyes, a raw, primal fear she had never seen in him before. This giant of a man, who had just single-handedly fought off a gang of killers without flinching, was terrified. "Now?" he stammered. "It's too soon." Another contraction seized her, sharp and powerful. She cried out, gripping the edge of the table. "The baby doesn't seem to agree," she gasped. The fear vanished from Cade's face, replaced by a steely resolve. He had faced down death tonight. He could face this. "All right," he said, his voice steady again. "All right, we can do this." He helped her upstairs, his movements gentle but efficient. He settled her into the bed in her room, the room that had once felt like a beautiful cage, but was now the only safe harbor in the world. The cradle in the corner no longer seemed ominous. It was a promise of the life that was now fighting its way into the world. He worked with a quiet competence that amazed her. He built up the fire, boiled water, gathered clean linens. His big, calloused hands, the hands of a rancher and a fighter, were surprisingly tender as he wiped her brow with a cool cloth. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort. Day turned to dusk, and the only world that existed was the room, the rhythm of her body, and Cade's low, calming voice. He never left her side. He encouraged her, comforted her, shared in her struggle. In the crucible of childbirth, the last of the walls between them melted away. He wasn't her jailer, her protector, or her father's enemy. He was just Cade, and she was Leia, and they were in this together. Just after midnight, as the moon rose over the scarred and silent ranch, a new sound filled the room, the powerful, hiccuping cry of a newborn baby. Cade carefully cleaned the child and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Leia's arms. He was perfect, a tiny, miraculous creature with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's determined chin. Leia looked down at her son, and a love so fierce and overwhelming filled her that it chased away all the fear and the pain. She had survived. They had survived. She looked up at Cade, who was watching them, his face a mixture of awe, relief, and a deep, unreadable emotion. "He needs a name," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He does," Cade agreed softly. She thought of her father, of his final, desperate act of love. She thought of this man, who had taken her in for all the wrong reasons, and then stayed for all the right ones. "His name is Isaiah," she said. "Isaiah Cade." A tear traced a clean path through the soot on Cade's cheek. He reached out a hesitant finger and gently touched the baby's hand. The tiny fingers immediately curled around his, a perfect, trusting grip. In that moment, a new thought, a crazy, impossible question, sparked in Leia's mind. It was born from exhaustion and the raw emotion of the night, but it wouldn't let go. The way Cade looked at the baby, the way he'd talked about her mother, saying Leia reminded him of her, the cradle, the impossibly intricate carvings. They weren't just random flowers and vines. Now, looking at it with fresh eyes, she saw they were specific flowers, mountain laurel, and intertwined with them, a bird she'd never seen before. She looked from the cradle to a small, carved wooden box on Cade's dresser, a box he kept his personal things in. The same bird was carved on its lid. It was a family symbol. "Cade," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My mother. You said I reminded you of her. Did you know her?" Cade's gaze shifted from the baby to her. The look in his eyes was one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "I knew her, a long, long time ago, before she ran away, before she ever met your father." The room fell silent, the only sound the soft breathing of the baby. The impossible question in Leia's mind grew louder, more insistent. "Who was she, Cade?" Leia asked, her heart pounding. "Who was my mother?" Cade took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at her, then at the baby in her arms, and the final, most devastating secret of all tumbled out. "Her name wasn't Sarah Beth Mercer," he said, his voice breaking. "Her real name was Sarah Rollins." The world stopped. Sarah. Rollins. "She was my sister, Leia," he whispered. "My little sister." Leia stared at him, her mind unable to process the words. Sister? Her mother was his sister? It was impossible. But as she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw it. The same dark, kind eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw. It was there. A ghost of a resemblance she had never been able to place. The pieces of the puzzle didn't just click into place, they exploded, reforming the entire picture of her life. Her mother hadn't run away with a stranger. She had run away from her family, from the ruin and the shame of what Isaiah Mercer had done to them. She had fallen in love with her family's destroyer. The secret she carried wasn't just about the stolen silver claim. It was about her own identity. The debt she wrote of wasn't just financial. It was a debt of blood. The cradle. Cade hadn't built it for a stranger's child. He had built it for his own kin. For his nephew. You're my uncle, Leia breathed, the words feeling foreign and unbelievable on her tongue. He nodded, tears now flowing freely down his face. I've been alone for so long, Leia. After my father died and Sarah ran, I thought I'd lost everyone. When your father sent you here, I thought it was the devil's own joke, but it wasn't. It was Providence. Her son, Isaiah Cade Rollins Mercer, stirred in her arms, a living, breathing testament to the tangled, tragic, and beautiful history that had brought them all to this moment. The ranch was not a prison or a battleground. It was a legacy. The land that had been stolen was now home to the last of the Rollins bloodline. The sun rose on a new day, its clean light pouring through the shattered windows. It illuminated a scene of devastation, but also one of hope. In the center of the wreckage, a new family had been forged in fire and truth. The journey ahead would be hard. They would have to rebuild the ranch, rebuild their lives. They would have to heal from the wounds of the past. But as Leia looked at her son and at the uncle she never knew she had, she knew they would not be doing it alone. The shame that had been forced upon her had, in the end, led her home. The monster of cold mercy had turned out to be her salvation, her family. The town of Cold Mercy could keep its secrets and its judgments. Here, in this valley, under the wide Montana sky, they would build something new, something honest, something born not of shame, but of a fierce and resilient love. The story of Leia Jane and Cade Rollins became a quiet legend in the mountains, a story whispered not in fear, but in wonder, a story of how sometimes the deepest betrayals can lead to the most profound blessings, and how family can be found in the most unexpected of places. If this story of redemption and unexpected family touched your heart, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You have no idea what's coming next, and you won't want to miss a single second of it.